And welcome everyone to another episode of Love Up or Shut Up right here on AngryMarks.com. My name is Peter H. I'm joined once again by my co-host from Omaha, Nebraska, Stevie J.
Hey, yo.
We should just rename this episode the Technical Issues episode. We've been having some issues on both ends today, and hopefully this doesn't disappear into the ether, right? So,
No, I think we'll be fine now.
alright. Well, we've got UFC 270 to review, we've got Bellator to preview, and lots of news, and I think we should start with the sad news coming out of Brazil this past week. Michael Falcao.
Yeah, Michael Falcao. He was stabbed in his hometown of Pelotas in Brazil, apparently as a result of a bar fight, which unfortunately is something of a pattern in his life. He is well known for an incident that got him fired from UFC for getting in a bar fight where one of his teammates got cracked in the head with a piece of lumber and nearly ended his career. So the guy sadly had a pattern, and it's unfortunate that it led to this. Our condolences to his wife and family and friends and fans everywhere. He was, at one point, an incredibly talented fighter before his life started spiraling out of control. He was the winner of a Bellator season tournament and actually faced Alexander Shlenko for the vacant middleweight title. It was vacant at the time, and I believe he lost by TKO in the second round of that fight, so I don't think his career ever recovered from that. I think it didn't go downhill immediately, but his life started going downhill not long after he got into UFC and had his first fight with Gerald Harris, and things just started falling apart.
Yeah, that fight was at UFC 123 in November of 2010, which was it was the show before our show in Montreal there. So, because there was the last pay-per-view before UFC 124 because they had the team coach. They had the finale episode of The Ultimate Fighter in between those two shows. But Gerald Harris, to beat him back in that day, back in 2010, you're doing something right. It's just, after that there was the unfortunateness of the arrest and then the bar fight. It's a sad thing. He was only 40 years old. That's too young, man.
Yeah, well, this is the point in the show where we have to once again ask the question that nobody who follows or covers or competes in mixed martial arts wants to think about, but at some point you do have to ask if there's a certain amount of trauma, concussive or subconcussive blows, either way, that once you've taken too many of those, it changes your brain in a way that's detrimental to your health. And I'm not just talking Alzheimer's or chronic traumatic encephalopathy or any of that. I'm just talking like it rewires your brain to the point you do things that are not good for you, like drug abuse, spousal abuse, behavioral issues. It's like maybe we're going to learn one of these days that if you keep getting knocked out repeatedly, you should stop fighting because you're one knockout away from losing control.
Well, I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I wish I knew who said it first, but, there is no senior circuit.
And the longer the sport goes on, the more apparent it becomes why. And none other than Bobby Lashley actually had a very good comment on that point. I was reading an interview of his, and he was talking about whether or not retirement was in his future. And he started talking about the things that he still wanted to do. Like, I want to have a fight with this guy in this sport, and I want to have a fight with this guy in this sport. And then he gets very blunt and matter of fact, and he says, I've always said I don't want to be one of those guys that hangs on too long. You see them in fighting, you see them standing out there unable to move, and they get knocked out, and they should have hung it up years ago. And I've told my family, if I ever get to be that guy, I'm going to quit, and I'm going to be a coach, and I'm not going to do this anymore.
I can see him as a coach. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I think, unfortunately, again, this is a hard thing to talk about because we both love this sport, but there are certain people in the sport who don't know how to quit. Like, they're addicted to the feeling of competition. They get some sort of, it's like an addictive drug. They can't quit. They want to quit, but they can't because they're compelled to keep fighting because of that adrenaline rush, because of that dopamine rush they get from being in physical combat. There's no substitute for it. I mean, everybody says winning is the greatest thing, but sometimes even losing is the greatest thing because at least you got to go out there and prove yourself one-on-one as a man or a woman or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if you're addicted to that thrill of getting to prove yourself one-on-one and you can't let it go, even when it's physically bad for your health, what's the exit plan? We're going to have to, at some point in the sport, have a reckoning with that people who have addictive personalities are the same people who succeed at the sport and then fail at the sport. Like BJ Penn, world champion, BJJ, brilliant, unlimited expertise in combat sports and jiu-jitsu competition. Obviously achieved the very heights of success you possibly could as a world champion. And then look at where he slid backward to because he couldn't let it go. He kept chasing that one win and he kept getting knocked out. And then what do you know? He starts getting in bar fights. Do you see a pattern here?
Yeah. No, there's probably more to the story. I don't know if we're ever going to get it, but, hopefully criminal charges, But I do want to mention one other news bit before we talk about what happened at UFC 270. It was announced today we're going to get a huge fight. I know how much you hate saying, cards down the road. Why talk about them? But this is a big fight at 155. Justin Gaethje is going to be facing Charles Oliveira.
Yeah, that is a really good fight if it happens.
May 7th.
Okay.
So it's a huge deal. I mean, that is a huge fight if it happens. I really hope it does. Man, that would be a fight that, it'd be at UFC 274. I think that's the only fight announced. Oh no, there's a couple of fights in there. It's not the only title fight as well. Glover Teixeira against Yuri Prochazka. Macy Chiasson and Norma Dumont, and Ariane Canelosi against Lupita Godinez. So they're stacking this card up way early at a fight location to be announced, which I love that arena. They got the best concessions. No, nothing? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That was fun. All right. UFC 270, Ngannou and Gane. There was a lot of talk going into this fight about the unification main event, and there's a few different ways to look at it. First, let's just get the result out of the way. Ngannou won via unanimous decision, 48-47 times 2 and a 49-46. conspicuous by his absence at the post-fight press conference after the first pay-per-view of the year, Dana White.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I want to compose my thoughts because there is so much that came out of this event about this main event.
Mm-hmm.
Item number 1. This was the last fight of Francis Ngannou's deal.
Mm-hmm.
However, he has a championship clause in his contract, as all UFC fighters who are a world champion have, that they can extend your deal for a year, even if the current deal expires, if you're the current world champion. Which makes sense, given the fact that, you don't really want somebody leaving with the title, so to speak. You don't want to have to vacate a title. You either want them to lose it to somebody and then let them go, or you want them to stay and defend it and then convince them to stay, like give them an offer they can't refuse. And that's where we get to the sticky part of the situation, because Ngannou has made it clear that he wants to do boxing along with MMA. And he says if we're truly independent contractors, we should be able to ply our trade anywhere we want, not just in the UFC. And I won't sign another deal unless UFC carves out an exemption for me to do boxing. He wants to face Tyson Fury. That's his dream.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that necessarily works out well for him. I've seen Tyson Fury box, and unless you're a full-time boxer, I don't think you want to go down that road. That will not work out well for you. But he thinks he's got a chance, and everybody thinks they've got a chance until they get in the ring with Tyson Fury. That's all I'm going to say about that. Anyway, so he wants this exemption, and I don't think Dana White wants to give it to him because, that's putting one of his top stars at risk on a pay-per-view that he's not even making any money from. So from his point of view, why would he do that? And from Ngannou's point of view, if I'm an independent contractor, why can't I do that? So they're kind of at a stalemate right now. And the other problem is that Francis Ngannou thinks he's worth more than he's being paid, and arguably he is. I believe he said he was not going to continue to fight for $600,000 a fight. Now, that might sound like a lot of money to you and me, and let's not make any bones about it that it is. But if you're generating $20 or $30 million in pay-per-view revenue on a Francis Ngannou fight, which there's every indication they make that and probably much more, considering they charge $75 for a pay-per-view, right? So he's not wrong to ask for more when he's drawing the house. And we don't know if he gets pay-per-view points, but even if he does, let's say he gets $1 for every pay-per-view buy, which would be like John Jones level numbers. But this is a guy at that level as far as I'm concerned. If he was, then if they did 1 million pay-per-view buys, he'd get $1 million. But even then, John Jones would get a base salary of $1 million before he gets those points. So for Francis Ngannou, I understand the argument is, if I'm one of your top stars, I'm worth $1 million even before the points. And if you're not going to give me that, why am I going to fight for you? And then there's the whole idea that Cyril Gane is still under contract and Francis Ngannou is not, even though he's got that contract extension. I'm sorry if I'm rambling a lot here, but there's so much to cover about this.
No, go ahead, brother.
And I won't say Dana White was playing favorites. That might be overstating it. But I think he would have been happier if Cyril Gane had won that fight. I think that would have made Dana White's life a lot easier. Then he could have gone, well, we have the champion under contract and you're not under contract, so we don't have to meet your demands. Goodbye.
Well, I think it's a case where there's so much
Yeah,
pro
like I
wrestling.
said, there's a lot to unpack about this, so take your time.
There's a lot of pro wrestling in this. There's a lot of independent contractors, right? It's very much they don't want to set a precedent because if they do it for Ngannou, they're gonna have to do it for so and so. If they do it for so and so, they gotta do it for this. But then again, didn't McGregor fight someone in boxing?
Yeah, they already carved out an exemption, but the reason they did it for McGregor was they actually got part of the revenue from that. They were co-promoters on that.
So why not co-promote this one?
I don't know that Tyson Fury's people are going to let UFC co-promote a boxing pay-per-view. I don't think they want I will not speak for them, but Tyson Fury makes so much money on boxing pay-per-views that why would they let anybody cut into that? What would be their incentive to do that?
Floyd did, so
Yeah, but everybody's different.
true. I mean, you have to also consider the fact that Ngannou was hurt in training.
Yeah, he tore his ACL, I believe, like 3 weeks before the fight.
Yeah, ACL and MCL, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so he took the fight in less than 100% condition, and by most accounts, he lost the first 2 rounds. I don't think that's too much of a debate. And the thing that surprised people the most, me included, was Francis Ngannou decided to win with wrestling. This is a guy who is known for his knockouts, right? This is what people pay to see. And I'm sure that Dana White was nonplussed to see Francis Ngannou taking Cyril Gane down. And the 5th round in particular, let's make no bones about it, he just laid on him. I mean,
Yep.
he was winning, but all he did was stay on top. He didn't really do much else.
It's like, do something. Anything. Bueller.
Mm-hmm. Hey, but I do not blame him, and I don't think anybody should. If he was coming in less than 100% shape and couldn't stand on his feet for long periods of time and was getting eaten up on the feet when he was, do you blame him for that? No, he did what he needed to win, and that's what any champion or any fighter should do, regardless of the criticism. Do what you need to do to win.
Now, when he comes back from knee surgery, I mean, do you rematch this fight? After what Dana White didn't show up at the post-fight press conference, had a matchmaker put the belt on Ngannou. Obviously, it's like, well, Gane couldn't beat you the first time. We're going to book him again, so he will. It doesn't work that way. I mean, is Gane...
No, I think Gane would, for better or worse, he has to move to the back of the line and earn another shot. And if Ngannou doesn't come back and Dana White wants to put the belt on him and say, you were the former inter champion and the champion left, so here, you get his belt, he can do that. But as long as Ngannou stays with UFC, Gane person to get back to Ngannou again, in my opinion.
No, I mean, you're on the rankings panel. I mean, the number 2 heavyweight is Miocic.
And
Number 3,
I
Lewis,
wouldn't even
so
necessarily give Miocic another fight either.
Lewis is 3, Blades is 4, and rounding out the top 5 is Volkov.
Right now, I hate to say it, but UFC is almost in the position where they'd be better off with Ngannou leaving, because you tell me any of those matches that you don't think Ngannou would win, or that he hasn't won already. Where is the good match for him in that would be viable as a pay-per-view main event?
I mean,
Okay, I'm gonna take this argument one step further here. I'm not just gonna say whether or not it should be. Give me those top 5 again.
Gane 1, Miocic 2, Lewis 3, Blades 4, Volkov 5.
Okay. You have to go back to 2018 when he lost back-to-back decisions to Lewis and Miocic. And he's knocked out Miocic since then. He's knocked out Curtis Blades since then. He's finished Cyril Gane by decision since then. He's also beaten Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos.
Maybe Derek Lewis.
I think Derek Lewis is the only argument you could make, but unfortunately, the problem with that is that Lewis just lost to Gane.
Yeah.
So, I just don't see it.
I mean,
I hate to say they'd be better off if Ngannou left, but I kind of think they would. I think you got a logjam there at the top of the division, and I don't know who faces him next.
I mean, if you have one fight left on your contract, I would put Greg Hardy.
Greg Hardy is not a contender.
No, but that way Ngannou can win his last fight and Hardy gets knocked out of UFC. Literally.
Sure, but that doesn't solve anything. I mean, Greg Hardy is not a worthy competitor for Francis Ngannou. Is he gonna?
I'm having fun at this. It's just you have to laugh at the position that the UFC is in right now because they've got a fighter who's their heavyweight champ who wants to do fighting and boxing, and Dana White is so upset with him. Wouldn't
even put the belt on him. Wouldn't even show up for the press conference.
I mean, it's very not telling, but it's a very bad look optics wise. I mean, Ngannou has a point about the independent contractor.
Of course he does. Everybody does. Everybody in pro wrestling and everybody in MMA has a point. You're not an independent contractor if you can't go where you want and do what you want. That's what an independent contractor is.
These fighters get paid so much, blah, 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 blah. There was a tweet I saw, and I can't believe it. I'm going to agree with something that Jake Paul said, but a backup punter in the NFL makes more than what Ngannou took home last night.
Yes, that's the reason I mentioned pay-per-view revenue. It's like these fighters are making a lot of money compared to you and I, but they're not making a fraction of what a reserve NFL player does, or a rookie NFL player does, or a punter does. I mean, there's no matter how much a baseline salary is, even if it's like $600,000, you can't tell me they're not underpaid when you see the staggering amount of revenue that UFC turns over. They're underpaid. There is no question. You do the math. You can't tell me, just because somebody makes $500,000 and you only make $50,000 a year doesn't mean they're overpaid. They're paid based on their respective field. And if the top salary in your field is $10 million and you're not making that, then that's a problem.
But I don't know if it was a shot. I doubt it was a shot at a certain punter who's in the WWE, but
Pat McAfee.
Yeah. But it was like a backup punter, which most teams don't have a backup punter. It's the kicker or the punter, right? Usually
a field goal kicker or a punter. You might have a specialist for each.
Yeah, but if one gets sick or pulls a hammy in warm-ups, the other one can fill in on a short-term basis.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something where that person makes more than, you know what I mean? Like,
And here's the thing, Dana White doesn't like people playing hardball with him. He doesn't mind if he's the one being a tough negotiator. He doesn't mind cracking the whip, but when other people try to stand up to him, he gets pissy.
Yeah. And it's not the first time he's done this. I mean, there are other fighters that,
John Jones, whether we like him or not.
yeah,
John Jones has stood up to Dana White and said, you pay me what I'm worth. And he's leveraged it so many times now that Dana White has had enough and doesn't want to pay him.
well, I mean, and it's a shame because usually on this show we talk about the results, and there was more news based off what happened after the contest that, people are still talking about to this day. I mean,
And it's an ongoing problem for UFC that's not going to go away. They're going to have to learn that there's give and take. And I think one of the things that, if you want to go back to the example from Jake Paul, the reason that punters and backup punters even make that kind of money is because there's been a give and take between the NFL ownership and the NFL players. And the NFL players, here's the kicker, no pun intended, the NFL players have a union, and that union represents them in negotiations with the ownership and says, you guys are making incredible amounts of money on merchandise sales and ticket sales and television revenue. We've seen the books. We've crunched the numbers. You're going to give us a percentage of that, or our players are going to walk away from the table. And they know how to negotiate. And the NFL has learned the hard way when they refuse to negotiate with the players and there's a strike, that the popularity of the NFL plummets and they start losing millions and millions of dollars. Those players have learned their worth at the bargaining table, and they know how to negotiate for what they're worth. And you can call them overpaid prima donnas all you want, but when you do the things physically that NFL players do, they deserve every penny of it and not a cent less. And UFC is going to have to learn that at some point with their top athletes. They're going to have to negotiate the same way that the NFL and the players do. And perhaps this means that mixed martial artists need a union, perhaps not. But if UFC isn't willing to give a little to get a little, this is just going to keep happening over and over again.
Yeah. And I hate to say stay tuned, but I have a feeling that we're going to see this again in this year.
It's not going to be the first time, and it's not going to be the last time.
Exactly. Let's move on to another title fight between Jefferson Figueroa and Brandon Mourinho.
Well, I get to tell you something that I don't very often on this show. You were absolutely right, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Although, if you ask the MMA media, you weren't. But it all depends on how you scored the third and the fifth round. And let's just say that the judges did not find in favor of Moreno, even though people scoring at home did.
It was the definition of a split decision fight. I mean, you're going to have people on both sides. It's a fight we've seen 3 times, and we're probably going to see a fourth.
Yeah, because now they're tied 1-1. 1 win, 1 loss, 1 draw. This might be the first time that they've ever legitimately needed a fourth fight to settle the issue.
Yeah, I thought Bellator was one of like trilogies. And this one's going to a fourth, and I mean, it was a good fight. It was competitive, wasn't boring. I mean, these guys are very interesting skill sets, and now with this win, you just put your hands up like, well, shit, let's do it again. It's like...
But there's another problem here.
What's that?
Like you said, this pay-per-view created more news beyond the fights than the fights themselves.
Mm-hmm.
If you do an immediate rematch and these two have their fourth fight, which we aren't arguing that they don't deserve it, but what about the other guys in the division that have been waiting on the sidelines for their chance while these guys fight each other over and over again? What about Askar Askarov? What about Brandon Royval? What about Alex Perez? Where did those guys figure into the equation?
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Perez, I feel like if he can prove himself by beating one of the other two that are ahead of him, pardon me, if he can beat Pantoja or Askarov, then why shouldn't he get a rematch with Figueroa? Why not him? Why is he less deserving of a rematch than a guy who's already had 3 fights with the champ, whether he was the champ or is the champ?
See, back in the day, you would do an Ultimate Fighter season, or
And the winner of the
you know,
season would be the number 1 contender. Yeah, I know where you're going with this.
or if you're Bellator, this would be a perfect opportunity for a tournament. Put them on opposite sides of the bracket. If you want to see a 4th fight, they got to go through the rest of the field to get to the finals. But put them,
But
have it like,
but if we're
you know,
talking about fighters negotiating their worth,
yeah, I know.
then you don't want to be in a tournament because you're not getting paid what you're worth to do that.
It's a shame there's no companies that do a one-night tournament anymore.
Yeah, but that's also probably for the best because that shortened a lot of careers for a lot of people having multiple fights in one night.
Well, what if you just did like this? What if you just said, it's not a tournament, we're just going to have like 2 semi-final fights on the same show.
You know what?
And
I got an even better solution for you. May I?
yeah, sure.
If we're taking the rankings as the actual, I don't want to overrate the importance of reporters here, especially me, okay? Put me the lowest on the totem pole that you possibly can in this whole equation. But if we're taking the rankings seriously and you've got number 1 through number 4 underneath the champion,
Yeah.
have number 1 face number 4 and have number 2 face number 3 and have the winners face each other and that person goes on. Just like college football.
I would also add, just so Figueroa is treated equally as the 4 fighters there, why don't you just mix it up and say, you know what, 1 fights 4, 2 fights 3, and we're gonna give let's see, Brandon Royval, who's number 4, or tied with 4.
He's currently tied for 4th.
So Royval gets a title shot against Figueroa, Perez Moreno, and then Askarov fights Pantoja. So you got 3 fights there, and then the winners fight each other for the next shot at Figueroa. But you don't let Figueroa.
I like that. I like that idea. Figueroa fights Royval, and the others fight each other, and everybody gets to do something, and nobody's kept waiting.
I like that.
That would, if this is all presuming that anybody involved gives a fuck about the flyweight division, which we know historically they do not. So we're talking about something that has a fuck's chance of happening.
Well, Michel Pereira beat Andre Filejo.
Filo.
Unanimous 2 rounds to 1. Filo.
Yeah. Or Fialo, but not Filho. I guarantee you it's not Filho.
Welcome to Rap Reviews.
No, that would be Captain Savaho, not Filaho.
I knew you were gonna do a reference. I just didn't know where you were going with it.
I wanna be saved. Big shout out to 40 Fonzarelli, E Figure 40.
So Pereira won his fight via decision. Said Nurmagomedov beat Corey Stamann, and I mean efficiently.
47 seconds, got in the guillotine choke, and it was a wrap, son. No relation to Khabib, too, as I will be only the millionth person to point that out. The name is a coincidence. He's not a cousin, he's not a brother, he's not a relation. It's just a common name in that part of the world.
It's just funny that the fights and I've said this before on the show, you watch certain fights when you're at home no one's around, and you're basically the stereotypical guy yelling at his TV sometimes, and it's like,
with a beer in your hand.
yeah, exactly. And you're like, don't, and it's over.
Yeah, don't stick your head out when you go for the double. Don't do that. Oh, you did it.
Yeah, he's not gonna say he's tapping. It's sort of like watching certain playoff football games this past weekend with 14 seconds left or 13 seconds left on the clock. It's like,
Dude, if that wasn't the best round of divisional NFL playoffs I've ever seen, I don't know what is.
and I'm in the middle.
Every game ended either with a last-second field goal or a last-second field goal to tie it to take it to overtime where it ended on a touchdown. Every game went to the wire.
So the running joke I saw was that, last week Dallas took the last 14 seconds to run the ball 10 yards. It took the Chiefs 13 seconds to orchestrate a game-tying field goal drive to send
But they
the game to
also had all three of their timeouts, and they also had Patrick Mahomes leading the charge, and there are few people better in a clutch situation than him.
Brady.
Well, that's what people are saying about Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes is this is the new Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. We are going to see these two do this over and over again to each other, and I hope they're right about that.
Yeah, it's just, it was an amazing weekend of football, and,
You know what else was amazing?
What's that?
I know you probably want to talk about Michael Morales beating Trevin Giles in the first round, but I think the main event of the prelims was better. Victor Henry and Hani Barcelos, for a guy who had never been in that position, facing a guy who had been a seasoned UFC veteran and was considered a standout in the bantamweight division, Victor Henry put it on his ass. He bloodied him up. He battered him around. He beat him every single round. And the commentators couldn't get over the fact that, holy shit, this kid from out of nowhere is shaking up the UFC bantamweight division. I'm like, damn straight he is. Look at the hurting he's putting on Hani Barcelos here. That was an amazing performance by Victor Henry.
Yeah,
well done, kid. Well done.
Yeah, I definitely took an advanced class there for sure.
Mm-hmm. And give some credit to Jack Della Maddalena too, a UFC newcomer who finished Pete Rodriguez in just under 3 minutes. You want excitement? These prelims had some excitement.
They did. Just to wrap up the main card though, Morales beat Giles. It was a TKO at 4:06 of the first round. Henry Barcelos 30-27 across the board, and yes, Maddalena beat Rodriguez 2:59 of the first round via TKO punches.
And Gravely won a unanimous decision over Simon Oliveira. And Matt Frivola in the opener of the prelims defeated Gennaro Valdez at 3:15 of the first round. And in the early prelims, Vanessa Demopoulos beat Silvana Gomez Juarez by armbar in 2 minutes and 25 seconds. And Jasmine Jasdavicius defeated Kay Hansen unanimous decision. The fight bonuses were $50,000 to Figueroa and Moreno, and performance of the night bonuses went to Sayed Nurmagomedov and Vanessa Demopoulos. Personally, I would have given one to Victor Henry too, but what do I know?
Well, let's move on to Bellator this weekend, coming to us from Phoenix, Arizona, pay-per-view, Bellator 273. It's going to be Ryan Darcy.
It's gonna be me. Didn't get that reference?
I did get it. Ryan Bader against Valentin Modovsky for the title. There's a definite size. There's a difference between Bader, who is a light heavyweight fighting at heavyweight, who's cut to shreds, and then you've got Modovsky, who is not as, he almost looks like Fedor in the sense that you see him at the weigh-in, you're like, that guy's a fighter, and then you see him in the fight, like, oh, he's one of those types of fighters. You don't have to be jacked to the gills to deliver a beating like Moldavsky does.
No, and if we're talking about size, let's see, how do I want to put it differently than the way you did. Let me just do it by the numbers, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Ryan Bader is 6'2", 205, which is why he's like a blown up heavyweight, right? He's not a natural heavyweight, but Valentin Moldavsky, the interim champion, is 6'1", 233. So he's technically shorter, but he's a natural heavyweight. He's always fought at heavyweight, whereas Bader fought forever and ever at light heavyweight. So that's why when you look at Moldavsky, you might think, without taking his shirt off, you might think that doesn't look like an impressive guy. And then when he gets in the cage and fights and he moves as quick as he moves and hits as hard as he hits, you're like, yeah, this guy is a freak athlete. He's like, that's 233 pounds of muscle. Like, he didn't have to put on weight to get up to heavyweight. He's just naturally that.
So, I remember watching one of his fights, and the opponent had that look of, I don't want to say he underestimated him, but the look on his face said to me, wait, what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that wasn't supposed to happen that way.
Kind of the deer in the headlights look.
Oh yeah, the hamster's the wheel is turning, but the hamster's dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's gonna be an interesting fight because I want to say it's gonna be a wrestling contest, and usually wrestling contests are boring in mixed martial arts, but I kind of want to see it. I want to see who's the better wrestler here.
I debate the question of whether or not a wrestling match in MMA is boring. But that being said, it would serve Bader well to keep this in the realm of wrestling, because he's been knocked out by Vadim Nemkov and Corey Anderson, so if he's not keeping this on the ground, it could be a problem.
You think he's got a glass jaw now?
I'm not going to go as far as to say he has a glass jaw, but this whole theory that he could be the champion in two divisions has definitely been shattered, glass jaw or not.
Well, let's move on to Benson Henderson and Islam Mamedov.
I'm sorry, when I sigh like that, you know that I just don't have the words.
Mm-hmm.
And
Gatekeepers won.
This is personal to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've said this before. I'll say it again. Benson Henderson is one of the nicest guys in this sport. Like, going back to the very first time I ever spoke to him in person at a UFC event, Benson was just all class. And when I interviewed him for Bellator, for coverage for MMA Mania, all class. Benson is not a gimmick. He is legitimately a nice guy. That's what makes this so hard for me to say. I don't want to downgrade somebody I have that much respect for. But he's lost 3 straight fights. And at times in those fights, he hasn't even looked competitive. It's not a problem if you're losing fights, but you're competitive in them. But when you're getting beaten in one-sided fights over and over again, even if you're not getting knocked out, you might be thinking it's time to move on to something else.
I don't know. Again, we go to the coaching argument. We go to, his career stretches to, God, how many promotions? I mean, He was
World
there.
Extreme Cage Fighting, Bellator MMA, UFC. Geez, how far back do we want to take this?
I mean, pioneer is a word we don't throw around lightly.
I mean, he goes all the way back to Midwest Championship Fighting. If you want to go back that far, he goes all the way back to 2006.
Oh man,
It kind of amazes me to think about the fact that his earliest fights in the sport were right here where I live. Like, I could have watched him fight on a Victory Fighting card in Council Bluffs if I had known. But that's besides the point. I think we have to really examine the position they're putting him in fighting Islam Mamedov. He's 20-1. You're telling me this isn't like a setup fight for Mamedov? He's getting a chance to beat a big name in the sport, and sadly, one that is not at his prime in the sport.
I mean, they're giving him a tough test here. It's not an easy fight here because you look at Mamedov and you look at what he's done so far. He's 21-1.
21-1, depending on whose record you look at.
Yeah,
I just don't see this going well for Benson, and it hasn't in any of his previous fights that he's been in, so why would this be different? I hate saying that, but I'm just being honest.
If he does win this fight, though, is he back?
It would rejuvenate his career. It would reestablish him as a top contender in the division, which he desperately needs right now.
But Mamedov is using this as a stepping stone to get a title shot.
I don't think it vaults him all the way to a title shot, but it'll put him in consideration for bigger opponents down the line.
And the fights they don't get any weaker here. I mean, you've got Henry Corrales and Aiden Lee.
Yeah, that is a very tough matchup. Aiden Lee, currently 10-5, but done pretty well in his last 4 fights. He's won 3 out of 4. His only loss was to Aaron Pico by submission, so he's a guy who's very much in the mix. And Henry Corrales is your always the bridesmaid, never the bride kind of fighter, where he's been in positions before where he's won fights, including fights he wasn't supposed to, like beating Aaron Pico, but it doesn't seem to work out into him getting a title shot, because then he'll lose a fight that you think he would have won, or you'll see him underperform against somebody like a Johnny Campbell, where he lost via rear naked choke. And I'm not taking anything away from Johnny Campbell. I'm just saying it's just that Henry Corrales it's like that proverbial brass ring that WWE likes to talk about. He gets within an inch of grabbing it and he falls short.
Oh, like GCW?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for those who don't get the reference. GCW had a big show this past weekend, and they had a brass ring ladder match.
Yes, they made fun of WWE by having somebody literally grab the brass ring.
AEW did that last year, I think, as well, with Scorpio Sky winning that match, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. And we've also got Saba Hamasi facing Jaleel Willis on this card.
I like Willis, but his fighter is more experienced, so Willis is going to have a solid game plan here.
But I would say that other than his last fight where he lost via guillotine choke, Willis was he was facing increasingly better competition, and even though he was winning by decision, he was winning one after another. He was beating the likes of Vinicius de Jesus and Mark Lemminger and Maicon Mendonca. I mean, he was on his way up before the loss to Berkamov. So if he can beat an established name like Sabah Humasi, then he's right back on track. And if Sabah Humasi puts it on him with the kind of power that I know Humasi has, it could be a very short night for Willis.
Quickly looking at the prelims, I see two names here that stand out. What about you?
Sadawad facing Christopher Gonzalez and Darian Caldwell facing Enrique Barzola.
Yeah, that's a prelim fight, dude.
Well, that's good for me because my Showtime subscription just ended.
Oh, jeez. All right, well, let's quickly hit the news here. And they've announced the new cast for Celebrity Big Brother. Now, I've never been a fan of of that franchise, that series.
I'm not a fan of any of those shows. Big Brother, Amazing Race, Survivor, I can't stand them.
Misha Tate is on the list.
Well, then kudos to her.
I guess she won't be fighting anytime soon because that's a live show, right? So it's not like...
I would debate how live it is, but sure, we'll go with that.
Let's move on to the post-fight. There was some fireworks, not Dana White related, but this is how you sell a fight. Figueroa is okay with wanting to have a rematch against, quote, crybaby Mourinho.
Why is it that you continually say Figueroa instead of Figueiredo?
I don't know.
It's almost like you're trying to sing opera. Figaro, Figaro, Figaro.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's what I do in my off time. I sing opera, right? Yeah, okay. There was a fight that got scratched with Charles Jourdain against Ilia Topuria. Topuria, basically the fight was scratched just before the weigh-ins on Friday. Doctors told him to stop cutting weight, and the state commission said, nope, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
So basically he had to go to the hospital. He got hydrated. When you have to go to the doctors because you can't lose weight, you know what I mean? Where they have to basically rush you to get fluids. I mean,
then you're fighting in the wrong weight class, but what do I know?
No, we've seen it time and time again. It's something,
and we're going to see it time and time again because everybody's trying to get an advantage. Everybody's trying to fight in a weight class they shouldn't.
Dan Hooker's going back to 145.
Which is probably a good thing.
In London, in March, against Arnold Allen.
Maybe not such a good thing.
Ow, stop hurting me. Oh, it's going to be fun.
Good luck to him.
Now, and this is something that I've brought up on the show before, and it was mentioned with the Ngannou fight. If you're going in, injuries happen in training. They do. It's a fact of, we've seen it over and over again. You get dinged up. If you have a torn ACL and MCL, why did the fight not get canceled? You know what I mean? At what point do the injury, you can't just hide it until after the fact?
Was it a full tear or a partial tear? Do we know? Because if it wasn't a full tear, then obviously he could still fight. He would just be limited in his mobility.
Grade 3 MCL tear as well as damage on his ACL and MPFL.
So it sounds like almost a full tear and a partial tear.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you could hide that. And I'm not saying that UFC looked the other way either. But let's just say somewhere between hiding it and looking the other way, the two sides met. Somewhere in the middle they met. With the amount of money that's on the line for a UFC pay-per-view, there are a lot of people who have a lot of incentive to ensure the fight happens.
I mean, grade 1 is the light end of the scale. Grade 3 is the highest on the scale.
That's why I said a full tear and some partial tearing on the other.
Yeesh.
I I don't know with these kind of things what you really expect me to say, because when it comes to any sport, the way human beings are treated in that sport is not necessarily the way you should treat people. It's, you're worth millions of dollars to me, so get your ass out there and play. I don't care if you're hurt. There's a lot of that mentality in sports, and it's valuing the dollar amount that a person can generate over their well-being and longevity and livelihood and personal life. And I don't know how to expound upon the morals and the ethics of that and not make this a 3-hour show.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on to PFL.
Speaking of morals and ethics,
they've re-signed with ESPN, multi-year deal. They come back April 20, but they do have their Challenger Series starts in a few weeks on February 18th.
Not where I thought you were going with that.
Well,
because in case you didn't see this,
uh-oh,
they got a legal notice from the World Series of Fighting telling them they are in breach of contract for the use of their marks.
The use of their marks?
Yeah, like, I would have to read this whole letter to you verbatim, and it was quite long, but basically they said, we're a global brand with the rights to operate in countries around the world, and we agreed that in North America, the Professional Fighters League could use our name as a way of I don't want to quote without reading it, and I don't have it in front of me, but basically it was like, you have the rights for this territory. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the whole AAA Lucha Libre versus Lucha Underground, if you know that whole debacle.
I do, yeah.
Okay, same kind of thing. And what they were saying was, we expected them to adhere to the terms of the contract in good faith. They did not. We attempted to contact them. They refused to respond. So we are hereby serving notice of a lawsuit to get them to cease and desist.
Good luck with that.
Well, if they've got a leg to stand on with the contract, then that's a problem for ESPN renewing their deal with PFL, because obviously there are some issues that have yet to be resolved. Before you go renewing a contract with somebody, you should make sure that the person you're signing has all their ducks in a row.
Well, I can't believe I'm transitioning from PFL to this. PFL has announced they've added Melvin Gillard, who hasn't won a fight now in 14 straight fights.
And I'm pretty sure I've gone on the record multiple times on this show as saying he's one of those people who shouldn't be fighting anymore.
He's fighting at, and I swear this is real, Bare Knuckle Fighting Championships, Knuckle Mania 2.
Oh, Lord.
He's fighting Ulysses Diaz. The main event is Mike Perry and Julian Lane.
How many times are you going to make me inhale and take a deep sigh on this show?
Well, any guesses as to what state this is going to happen in, Stevie?
It would either be Texas or Florida.
Florida.
Of course.
February 19th.
You talk about not giving a fuck about human life, then you're talking about Florida.
Knuckle Mania 2.
In some case, in some way, in some fashion, I almost respect the chutzpah of it. Like, if you're gonna be as, how do I put this? If you're gonna go as low as you can possibly go, you might as well, if you're gonna wallow in the mud, you might as well enjoy the bath. Like, revel in it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
be shameless about it. And they're being shameless about it by calling it Knuckle Mania 2. Like, fine, okay, if you really want to be that, then be that. Like, own it. Be 100% about it. Don't half-ass it, whole-ass it. And let's just say bare knuckle fighting, they whole-ass. They do not hold it back.
Oh man. All right. Well, I've got one last story here, and it has a Canadian twist to it.
So does that mean it's a cruller instead of a donut?
Oh, gee.
You said Canadian twist.
That's inside baseball there. One of the co-founders of ONE FC, has left his position to become the new president and chief executive officer of the Edmonton Elks in the CFL.
Who?
Victor Cooey.
Oh. I actually know that name. I'm a little surprised that he's leaving ONE for that.
He was actually born and raised in Edmonton, so local boy comes home.
Oh, well, and you put it that way, it makes sense, but damn, that's a huge loss for ONE.
Yeah, but that's a great get for
Yeah, oh yeah, that's absolutely a great get for the Elks. That's tremendous.
And for those who don't know, the Elks are formerly known as the Edmonton Eskimos. They did a name change because, well,
Yeah, calling yourself after a Native American ethnicity is not a wise move in 2022.
Yeah, and I think this month or in the next couple of weeks, the Washington No Names are going to be getting a new name. So
I still think they should be called the Washington Generals, but what do I know?
Oh, maybe, but I mean, Edmonton was a really bad team last year, and I think this signing could bring in some change, new attitude, and it could be a really huge boost for that franchise. So I'm really happy to see that.
Yeah, they do need some help.
So, Stevie, this weekend we've also got the Royal Rumble, but before that, Thursday night AMP.
We're going to talk about Red Dwarf Season 2, Episode 3. It's called Thanks for the Memory.
I think I remember that one.
If you do remember that one, it's where Dave Lister tries to do Arnold Rimmer a favor.
Yeah, that never goes well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy. Well, I can confirm that, Stevie. I don't think I think we can safely confirm on this show that you're not one of the mystery entries in the Royal Rumble this year.
No, but Ronda Rousey might be.
Yeah, that's a lot. Actually, you're reading my notes again. Ronda Rousey is rumored to make her return at Royal Rumble for another run. I think possibly WrestleMania's in her future as well.
Yeah, 3 things have come out. 1, that she's getting into ring shape. 2, that they were negotiating with her for the WrestleMania appearance, and she apparently agreed to it. And 3, if she's going to be at WrestleMania, it would only make sense for her to be in the Royal Rumble.
So that'll be all revealed next week, or this weekend. So hopefully
Saturday.
Saturday, not Sunday. Saturday, because, they don't want to run on the same day as the championship games. So, next week
I miss the good old days when the Royal Rumble used to take place between the championship games and the Super Bowl. Whatever happened to that?
Well, this year, yeah, it's true. But this year also, I miss when SummerSlam pay-per-view was in August.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, the WWE doing pay-per-views on Saturdays, they got to be really careful with that because of, they're running head-to-head against Bellator is one thing, but if you go up against a UFC show, I don't know about that.
Yeah, they're lucky it's not a UFC pay-per-view.
Right. Well, Stevie, for Stevie J, I'm Peter H, the Hardcore Canadian. Thanks for listening, and as I always say, never leave it to the judges. Good night, everybody.
See ya.